Mr. Trenin, welcome to ORF. You are a frequent guest on our platform. You don't really need any introductions, but we all know you as one of the best foreign policy experts in Russia. And now we are going to ask you some questions which relate to a matter in which we Indians are not really very well conversant. And I'm talking about the crisis in Nagorno-Karabakh. Let me start with a very simple question. Why did this crisis erupt now?
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm delighted to be on the show, delighted to be talking with you, and thank you very much for this very kind invitation. Second, with regard to the question itself, I think that the timing was perfect from the standpoint of those who started what they call the counteroffensive, meaning that the Azerbaijanis who launched the offensive were responding to the Armenian offensive in the early 1990s that led to the stalemate in Karabakh that lasted for 26 years, in which Azerbaijan always claimed that it lost 20% of its national territory. Now, the timing was good for Azerbaijan for the following reasons. Azerbaijan used the 26 years of the stalemate in Karabakh to build a really strong military force. It equipped it with some of the state-of-the-art technology, including drones, that they got, many of them, from their very close ally, Turkey. Now, Azerbaijan and Turkey were actually allies in this war, where Azerbaijani soldiers were on the ground, but the Turks provided them with some military equipment, i.e. drones, with intelligence and other military assistance. For years, there have been scores of Turkish advisors in the Azerbaijani forces. Now, the timing of this Second Karabakh War coincided with the final stages of the American election campaign. So the war started on 27 September this year. So the United States was distracted, focused very much on the all-important campaign at home. It also happened, I don't think that it was very much a part of the calculation. It came as a bonus. Now, Russia was also preoccupied with another crisis in Belarus, a much more important country in terms of its strategic position vis-a-vis Russia. There was another crisis in another country allied to Russia, Kyrgyzstan, a political crisis coming out of the election. So with Russia preoccupied with crises in its neighborhood, the United States very much focused on itself. The Azerbaijani forces ready and well equipped. It was President Erdogan, I think, who was very much behind the scenes co-planning the offensive with the Azerbaijani President Aliyev. So they started that war under the best of possible circumstances. I may add also that Europe, of course, for years has been very much focused on its domestic developments, not very well united, not having a coherent foreign policy. So it needs to be said that the Azerbaijan-Armenia conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh had been, or is, and continues to be actually, under the purview of the so-called Minsk Group of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which has three co-chairs: Russia, the United States, and France. So all those three countries were focused on something else, and Turkey with Azerbaijan struck where it best suited them.
Thank you for this detailed background. And I will, my next question is in fact linked with your final sentences. Now that this new agreement has come into place, where does that place the Minsk agreement? What is the role now that is assigned for countries like France and the US? Are they totally removed from the picture?
Well, they're not totally removed from the picture, but they're certainly not at the center of the scene anymore. Of course, the United States, if the United States wants to focus on something, there's nothing stopping the United States from doing that. The issue is, however, that the United States is increasingly focused on itself for a host of reasons that we know pretty well, all of us. So the Minsk group co-chairs were received in Moscow just the other day by the Russian foreign minister. Russia wants to send a message to the outside world that what it's doing is guided by Russia's desire to stop the bloodletting, and then turn the conflict back into the diplomatic channels. Russia does not want to usurp the role as the sole peacemaker in the region, but it doesn't want the other two co-chairs to question what Russia has already done. So that's the deal that Moscow offers them. We invite you back into the room, and we're ready to collaborate with you on an equal basis, but you guys accept what has been done in the last several days, with Russia brokering a truce. It's not a peace deal, it's a truce between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and that is accompanied by a special arrangement with Turkey, between Russia and Turkey, who will be monitoring the situation from a distance. Let me say that the agreement, the so-called trilateral agreement on Nagorno-Karabakh that stopped the war, provides for a ceasefire supported by solely Russian peacekeepers deployed in the still Armenian-held regions of Nagorno-Karabakh. In addition, Russia and Turkey will establish a monitoring center to monitor the ceasefire from a distance using drones, etc., but no Turkish troops on the ground. That's a very clear demand, a very clear requirement from the Russian side that the Turks, I don't think, can ignore. And that's basically the deal. The Russian troops will be staying in the region for 5 years under the terms of that agreement. And if need be, that agreement could be, and the Russian presence could be extended by another 5 years.
If I was to ask you as a journalist, my old self is waking up. If I was to ask you as a journalist, did the West lose out? Were they in a better position before this war started?
Well, I would say this. What's happening is a reconfiguration of the global geopolitical space. The West, which used to be dominant everywhere in the world following the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, is, for a variety of reasons, is regions, not on others. And the South Caucasus, which for a period of time was high on the agenda for the United States and the European Union. The United States in terms of promoting democracy on the one hand, and making sure that those former Soviet states do not fall back into the Russian sphere of influence on the other. The Europeans, who were promoting what they called the Eastern Partnership Program, which also extended to the South Caucasus, are looking elsewhere. Actually, both the United States and Europe have to go abroad and do things abroad. And also the credibility of the United States and of Europe has sunk somewhat. So I wouldn't say that the West lost that. The West still has a very strong position in the South Caucasus. Georgia, the third former Soviet republic in the South Caucasus region, is a staunch ally of the United States and is an aspirant member of the European Union. It's still there. Secretary of State Pompeo has just been to Tbilisi, yes, the capital of Georgia. But what's happening now is Turkey, a regional power, wielding much more influence than ever before. And this is what we've been seeing.
I'll interrupt you here. We'll come to Turkey separately.
But my thesis is that it's the Western powers, which were global dominant powers for a couple of decades following the end of the Cold War, are seeing, or let's say, their sphere of interest rather than influence is shrinking for certain reasons. And regional powers, such as Turkey, are moving up and expanding their influence. That's what we're seeing, not just in that part of the world, but elsewhere as well.
I completely agree with you, Dmitri. My question is, before we move on to the external powers, I want to go back into Azerbaijan and Armenia. For Mr. Ilham Aliyev, it is clearly a win. I mean, he is probably bolstered his hold on power. If there were any doubts about it, if there were any people who were willing to question it, right now, all that has died down. So he is back in the saddle very firmly. But the same cannot be said about Nikol Pashinyan. Now, what is the status with Pashinyan? Pashinyan, incidentally, if I remember correctly, was seen at one point as being a somewhat different Armenian leader who was more inclined to lean westwards than towards Russia. What will be the situation internally in Armenia?
Well, it's a very tumultuous situation at this point. Pashinyan has just survived the first wave of protests that aimed to topple him. He is holding out, but how long he will be able to hold out is not clear. Very ironically, the Russians, who have no reason to place more confidence in Pashinyan than they did in his predecessors, are not interested for the time being in his ouster, because it's Pashinyan's signature under the trilateral agreement that forms the basis of the current arrangement, including the presence of the Russian forces in the region. So the crisis, the political crisis in Yerevan, which I think will go very deep. It's soul searching. It's such a tremendous and such a surprising defeat for the Armenian people that they have to digest it. They have to sort out things. They have to go beyond simply replacing the figurehead of their government. It's not Pashinyan's fault, not completely Pashinyan's fault that Armenia lost this war and did not use the situation to its advantage when it did hold the high ground in Karabakh and when Azerbaijan was on a back foot. They thought that the status quo would last forever. Well, no status quo lasts forever. No victory is eternal. And those who think that way have to, well, rue the day. And they have to pay dearly for having been complacent following their victory. So I think Russia, for the time being, takes a very pragmatic attitude, both toward Pashinyan and toward Armenia. It's interesting, although Armenia is a nominal ally of Russia, Azerbaijan is a close partner of Russia. And Russia has about 2+ million people of either extraction within its own borders. So Russia was the last country to wish a protracted conflict, to wish the conflict to spill over into Russia itself. So they took a very neutral line inconsistent as it may have been seen by the Armenians, between its ally and its partner. But let me also add here that Russia was under no obligation to defend Armenia in Karabakh, which Russia regards as part of Azerbaijan alongside the rest of the international community. And I would say Armenia, that failed to recognize Nagorno-Karabakh as a separate state that has declared its independence. So Russia broke no obligations, but for many Armenians, it was seen as having betrayed them.
Sorry, I forgot to press my unmute. Before we go to the next question, you know, there is a lack of real figures. What are the Russian estimate of the losses, military and civilian, in terms of lives in this little over 1 month conflict?
Well, we don't have the figures from Azerbaijan, and we only have partial figures from Armenia. Mr. Putin said some time ago that the number of casualties on both sides was like 5,000 people. That was a couple of weeks before the end of the conflict, of the current phase of the conflict. Let me be cautious. Right now, it looks like the Armenians may have lost about 2,000 plus people, both in the military and civilian, from the civilian population, and similar, maybe a somewhat higher number of Azeris died, but the Azeris have not released any information on that score so far.
Dmitri, now we will come to the external powers that are, you know, dabbling their fingers or toes in troubled waters. Russia's role is, of course, understandable, but Turkey's role in this whole area seems to be somewhat new. I mean, the assertion of Turkish power. I know that economically they were always active, but this assertion of military and strategic power by Erdogan, why did Russia allow it?
Well, first, what is new can actually be very old. There were times, let's say, slightly over 2 centuries ago, when the Turks owned Crimea, the entire Baltic Sea coast, including the South Caucasus part of it, certainly parts of Georgia, other parts of the South Caucasus were under Turkish dominance. Actually, Azerbaijan and Armenia were part of the Persian Empire until the 1820s, when those territories were annexed by the Russians. So those countries, Iran, Turkey, as Russia, I would say, have long memories. And what Erdogan, President Erdogan, is trying to do is not clearly to physically recreate the Ottoman Empire that ruled over vast expanses of territory in Southeastern Europe, Asia Minor, the Black Sea region, part of the Caucasus, a large part of the Middle East, a large part of North Africa, but to be the regional power in that region, to be influential from Libya to Central Asia, from Ukraine to Syria. To the Turks, not only Syria, but the Caucasus is part of their near abroad. When the Russian Empire collapsed 100 years ago, Turkey sent in forces into the South Caucasus region, and it was militarily and politically very much active in Azerbaijan. Actually, 100 years ago, Azerbaijan and Armenia, which were both independent for a couple of years each before they were reintegrated into the now Soviet Union, they managed to use that time frame to wage a war between the two of them. So we're talking about long histories, long memories, and for Erdogan, this is his most important foreign policy project. He is trying to build Turkey into a great power in that part of the world where Europe meets Asia. And he's succeeding in several directions.
Yes, so you would essentially, that's what you said. He is succeeding. Now, let me ask you about some minor players in that region. And I'm asking this because of the ethnic composition that is there. After all, you have Armenia, which is predominantly Christian, and you have Azerbaijan, which has a large Shia population, which is Muslim, but a large population is Shia. Now you have players like Iran also in the mix. And surprise, surprise, we find that Israel is also in the mix.
Yep.
What is the role of these? Are they bit players or are they serious contenders to play the game in this region?
Well, I think that both Iran and Israel are important players. They are in a different category from Russia and Turkey, but or the United States for that matter. But they're closer, and they have and they've made some progress toward the goal of establishing their presence. Israel, alongside Turkey, provided Azerbaijan with drones and other military equipment. The reason for Israel to militarily assist a Muslim country which has, they're not very religious, the Azeris, at least at this point, but still it's a Shia country. And for Israel, the bonus is winning a platform that is geographically close to Iran.
Oh, yes, of course.
Azerbaijan has a long border with Iran, and that border comes fairly close to Tehran, well, reasonably close to Tehran. And for Israel, it makes sense to be good friends with Azerbaijan in order to be able to keep Iran under pressure. As far as Iran itself is concerned, well, most Azeris, actually, most ethnic Azeris actually live in the territory of Iran. So Azerbaijan as a separate country, as an independent country, has as neighbors on the Iranian side of the border, a couple of provinces that are called, that are actually Azeri populated. And the Soviet Union at some point after the end of the Second World War, or toward the end of the Second World War, sought to help Azeri national liberation in that part of Iran with a view to attaching them to the Soviet Republic of Azerbaijan. So basically, Iran Iran's position is nuanced. It's not very friendly with Baku traditionally, because it sees Baku as a threat to the internal, an independent Azeri state is seen in Tehran as a potential threat to the unity of Iran, which is essentially a small empire.
Dmitri, and
so that's one reason.
Yeah, Dmitri, now that I'm being reminded that we are running out of time, I just want to ask you one final question. Given what has happened, given the role that Russia has played, what would you consider to be the wins and losses sustained by Russia in all this that has taken place?
Well, the win for Russia is having put an end to the war. In the old days, just one phone call from Putin to Baku and Yerevan would have sufficed to stop the fighting. He did it several times, most recently in July this year, but no longer now. It doesn't suffice anymore. So Russia did stop the war. Second of all, Russia is no longer reliant on the two warring parties to keep the peace. It has its peacekeepers in the region. It has its forces for the first time in what is legally recognized the territory of Azerbaijan. So you may say that Russia, seen from the standpoint of the international community, it has its forces in the territory of all three South Caucasus countries. It has a base in Armenia, it has peacekeepers in Karabakh, which is part of Azerbaijan, and it has military bases in South Ossetia and Abkhazia, which Russia recognizes as independent states, but internationally those territories are recognized as part of Georgia. So you have 11,000 Russian forces in the region, and that is a symbol of Russian military presence and Russian power. So much for the wins. The losses include Russia having had to legitimize the Turkish role in the South Caucasus. Turkey, of course, was able to come to the South Caucasus via Azerbaijan with its advisors and all that. Russia could not say anything about that. But now Russia has essentially recognized Turkey as its partner in monitoring the ceasefire in Karabakh. And there's a joint monitoring center. So Russia basically has had reluctantly to legitimize Turkey's role in the region. A minor win for Russia is the relatively low profile of the West, primarily the United States, but in exchange for that, it has a much higher profile of Turkey. So rather than pushing back against America, the global power, Russia has to deal with Turkey. And that will be long, and that will require a lot of energy, a lot of cunning, a lot of whatever. Russia has been doing that for years in Syria, in Libya, in other parts of the Middle East and North Africa, and it will have to add the South Caucasus to that list.
Thank you so much, Dmitri. I mean, as usual, you have been so clear on this, and I think anyone who listens to this will have a very good picture of the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. Thank you so much, Dmitri. It has been an outstanding interview, one of the best I've ever conducted. Thank you.